The ancient communication array on Rilani Prime had never carried such desperate words. Chancellor Tem pressed his four-fingered hand against the smooth control surface, his blue skin pale with exhaustion. Around him, the emergency council chamber buzzed with panicked voices in dozens of languages. Through the transparent dome above, the night sky flickered with unnatural colors as enemy ships burned through the outer defensive grid. "Send it to everyone," Tem whispered to the communications officer. "Every world, every species, every government that might listen." The message began broadcasting across the galaxy on all known frequencies. Tem's voice, usually calm and measured, cracked with emotion as he spoke into the recording device. "This is Chancellor Tem of the Rilani Federation. Our 12 systems are under attack by the Vorax swarm. 40 billion lives hang in the balance. We have tried negotiation. We have tried withdrawal. We have tried everything our peaceful ways allow. Nothing works against them." The hologram in the center of the chamber showed the devastating reality. Red dots marked Vorax positions spreading like an infection across Rilani space. Each dot represented millions of bioships, creatures that ate planets and left nothing but empty rock behind. 3 entire worlds had already fallen silent. Defense Coordinator Lesh pulled up tactical displays with trembling hands. The energy shields around New Rilani collapsed 2 hours ago. The evacuation ships are overwhelmed. The Vorak are breeding faster than we can count them. Tem closed his eyes and continued the message. "We know most of you will not help. We understand the risks. The Vorak have destroyed every military force sent against them for 300 years. But if anyone anywhere has weapons or tactics we have not tried, please respond. Our children are dying." The first responses came quickly. The Zephyrian Empire sent formal regrets and offered to accept refugees. The Crystal Consortium expressed deep sympathy, but explained their forces were committed elsewhere. The Synthetic Collective calculated the probability of successful intervention at 0.003% and recommended immediate evacuation. Each refusal hit Tem like a physical blow. He understood their reasoning. The Rilani had always been philosophers and healers, not warriors. Their military consisted mainly of defensive shields and evacuation protocols. When the Vorak had first appeared in their space, the Rilani had tried to communicate, to understand what the creatures wanted. The answer had come in the form of consumed colonies and empty worlds. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we have an unusual response. The signal originated from the Galactic Rim, from a small yellow star barely registered in most navigation databases. The message was simple and broadcast on primitive radio frequencies. This is Admiral Torres of the Human Defense Fleet. We received your distress call. We are preparing a response force. Maintain defensive positions. Help is coming." "Advisor," Kem scoffed from across the chamber. "Humans! They barely have interstellar travel. Their weapons are chemical explosives and metal projectiles. What could they possibly do against the Vorak?" Tem studied the data file attached to the human message. The species had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Their ships were crude metal constructs powered by fusion reactors. They had no energy weapons, no gravitic shields, no quantum communication arrays. By galactic standards, they were primitives playing with fire and sharp sticks. But the file also contained something else. Combat records from something called the Resource Wars. Images of massive bipedal machines striding through burning cities. Humans called them Warwalkers, mechanical giants controlled by individual pilots. The weapons they carried looked ancient, by galactic standards, but the destruction they caused was undeniable. "They want to send 80 of these machines," Tem read from the tactical report, "along with support ships and 20,000 personnel." The council chamber fell silent except for the distant rumble of defensive batteries engaging Vorax scouts. Everyone knew it was hopeless. 80 primitive war machines against 10 million bioships. It would be a massacre, and not in humanity's favor. Defense Coordinator Lesh pulled up the latest battle reports. The Vorax have adapted to every energy weapon we've used. Their bioarmor evolves in real time. They absorb plasma bursts and convert particle beams into fuel for their growth. These human kinetic weapons, they might work differently, but the numbers are impossible. Tem watched another red dot appear on the tactical display. Another colony world had gone silent. Soon, the Vorax would reach the core systems, the worlds where billions of Rilani lived in floating cities among the clouds. His people had never known real war, never developed the killer instinct that seemed to drive species like the extinct Gorlan war clans. Send a response to the humans, he decided. Thank them for their offer, but explain the situation is beyond hope. Recommend they stay away. The communications officer hesitated. Sir, they've already launched. 3 ships, massive ones. They'll arrive in the Neth system in 6 days. Through the dome, another flash lit the sky. The orbital defense platforms were falling one by one, their energy weapons useless against creatures that treated starfire like sunlight. Tem felt the weight of 40 billion lives pressing down on his shoulders. Every choice seemed wrong. Every path led to extinction. Patch me through to Admiral Torres, he said finally. The human appeared on the main screen, a weathered man with gray hair and steel in his eyes. Behind him, Tem could see the bridge of what looked like a mobile city, all function and no elegance. Hundreds of humans moved with purpose across multiple levels, checking weapons and preparing for war. Chancellor, Torres said with a slight nod, we've analyzed your tactical data. The situation is bad, but not hopeless. Admiral, with respect, you don't understand what you're facing. The Vorax adapt to any weapon system within hours. They've destroyed the combined fleets of 17 different civilizations. Torres smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. Chancellor, those fleets used energy weapons, plasma, particles, directed radiation. The Vorax evolved to handle that. But they've never faced what humans call kinetic warfare. We're bringing something different to your fight. The connection cut as Torres returned to his preparations. Tem stared at the empty screen, wondering if he had just condemned 20,000 humans to death, or if perhaps, against all logic and probability, these primitive warriors might actually accomplish what the galaxy's most advanced militaries could not. Outside, the sky burned with the colors of dying worlds, but for the first time in weeks, Chancellor Tem allowed himself to hope. The Vorax bioships hung in space like diseased fruit, their organic hulls pulsing with veins of bioluminescent fluid. Thousands of them surrounded the agricultural world of Neth, feeding on the planet's atmosphere while their ground forms consumed every living thing on the surface. The Rilani evacuation fleet had managed to save perhaps 10% of the population before the swarm overwhelmed their defenses. Then the human ships arrived, and the galaxy learned what real warships looked like. The 3 vessels that dropped out of hyperspace resembled floating mountains more than spacecraft. Each carrier stretched 15 kilometers from bow to stern, their hulls scarred with impact craters and weapon ports. They moved with the grace of predators, their fusion drives painting space with nuclear fire. No elegant curves or artistic flourishes marked their design, just brutal functionality wrapped in armor, plating thick enough to stop asteroids. Admiral Torres stood in the Combat Information Center of the flagship Vengeance, watching the tactical display update with enemy positions. Around him, his staff worked with quiet efficiency, their movements precise and economical. These were veterans of the resource wars, men and women who had fought house to house in the ruins of Detroit and held the line at the Sahara front. Deployment. Configuration Alpha, Torres ordered. All Warwalkers to ready status. Combat drops in 30 minutes. The Rilani observation ship Harmony floated at a safe distance, its crew watching in fascination and growing horror as the human carriers began their launch preparations. Chancellor Tem had insisted on witnessing humanity's first engagement personally, despite the obvious danger. They're not engaging the bioships, observed Defense Coordinator Lesh, studying the tactical feed. "Why aren't they firing their weapons?" Through the observation deck's viewport, they could see the human carriers opening like mechanical flowers. Massive bay doors slid back to reveal the Warwalkers in their launch cradles. Each machine stood 80 meters tall, a humanoid colossus of steel, and ceramics bristling with weapon systems. Their designs varied by model and pilot preference, but all shared the same predatory grace, the same promise of controlled violence. Pilot Rodriguez strapped himself into the neural interface chair of his Warwalker, designated Iron Fist. The machine systems came online around him, artificial nerves connecting to his own through fiber optic implants. For a moment, he experienced the disorientation of suddenly possessing an 80-meter body. Then his training took over and human and machine merged into a single entity. "All walkers report ready status," he announced over the tactical network. "Dropping in T-minus 60 seconds. The Rilani watched in amazement as the first wave of Warwalkers ejected from their carriers. Instead of the expected fighter craft or energy weapon platforms, 80 mechanical giants fell toward Neth like metal meteors. Their armor plating glowed red-hot from atmospheric entry, but the machines showed no sign of distress. "Impossible," whispered Engineer Call from the Rilani observation team. "Those heat signatures should have killed any pilot inside. How are they surviving the descent?" Pilot Kim adjusted her machine's trajectory with practiced ease, the Warwalker Thunder responding to her thoughts as naturally as her own limbs. Around her, the other pilots maintained formation despite the chaos of atmospheric entry. Heat shielding protected their cockpits, while internal dampeners absorbed the brutal deceleration forces that would have liquefied most galactic species. The first Warwalker touched down in a field outside New Rilani's ruins with an impact that registered on seismic detectors 50 kilometers away. Iron Fist rose from the crater it had created, dirt and debris cascading off its armored hull. Rodriguez oriented himself quickly, taking in the devastation around the former capital city. The Vorax had been thorough. Bioforms the size of ground vehicles crawled through the rubble, digesting everything organic they encountered. Larger creatures, resembling metallic beetles crossed with industrial machinery, worked to process the city's infrastructure into materials for their hive constructs. In the distance, a growing organic tower pulsed with malevolent life. "Contact front," Rodriguez reported as his sensors detected movement. A swarm of Vorax flyers, each the size of a human fighter, rose from the ruins and oriented toward his position. Engaging targets. The galaxy's military observers expected some kind of energy discharge, perhaps primitive plasma bolts or particle beams. Instead, Iron Fist raised its primary weapon, a massive rotary cannon that began spinning with a mechanical whine. The sound carried clearly through Neth's thick atmosphere, a deep thrumming that seemed to shake the ground itself. When the weapon fired, it redefined the observer's understanding of warfare. 20-millimeter depleted uranium rounds erupted from the cannon at 6,000 rounds per minute. Each projectile carried the kinetic energy of a small meteor, and the stream of fire that poured from the Warwalker's weapon looked like a solid beam of destruction. The Vorax flyers adapted to absorb energy weapons and regenerate from plasma. Damage had no defense against simple physics. The first creatures struck by the barrage simply disintegrated. Their bio-armor, evolved over centuries to deflect directed energy, offered no protection against high-velocity metal traveling at 3 times the speed of sound. Ichor and organic fragments sprayed across the battlefield as the cannon fire swept through the swarm like a scythe through wheat. "By the ancients," breathed Chancellor Tim, watching from the observation ship. "They're just destroying them." More Warwalkers touched down around the ruined city, each one bringing its own specialized arsenal. Thunder carried missile pods, loaded with conventional explosives, weapons that seemed laughably primitive until they began detonating inside Vorax bioforms. The creature's adaptive healing, designed to seal energy weapon wounds, could not cope with the massive internal trauma caused by expanding gases and flying shrapnel. Pilot Davis landed her machine, designated Stone Wall, near the organic tower the Vorax were constructing. The structure pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, clearly some kind of command node for the local swarm. Davis studied it through her targeting systems, then selected an appropriate response. The shoulder-mounted rocket launchers on Stonewall aligned with mechanical precision. Each missile contained a different type of warhead, from high explosive to incendiary to armor-piercing. Davis fired the entire salvo in sequence, bracketing the tower with overlapping explosions. The Vorax structure, designed to withstand energy, bombardment and regenerate from plasma scoring, had no answer to the chemical violence that now consumed it. Conventional explosives tore through bio-armor like tissue paper. Thermite charges burned through organic supports with temperatures that turned living tissue to ash. White phosphorus rounds created fires that burned underwater and could not be extinguished by any biological process. Within minutes, the tower collapsed into a burning ruin. The local Vorax, cut off from their coordination node, began moving erratically, their hive mind discipline dissolving into confusion. Grid square secured, Davis reported with professional calm. Moving to secondary objectives, aboard the observation ship. The Rilani command staff watched in stunned silence as their planet's surface lit up with explosions and gunfire. The humans fought like nothing they had ever seen, bringing industrial-scale violence to bear against enemies that had seemed invincible. Where energy weapons had failed to penetrate Vorax bio-armor, simple kinetic rounds punched through like the creatures were made of paper. Admiral Torres, Chancellor Tem said into his communicator, "Your weapons, they're incredibly effective, but there are millions of Vorax bioships in orbit. When they descend to support their ground forces," Torres's voice carried a predatory satisfaction that sent chills through the Rilani. "Let them come, Chancellor. My walkers are just getting warmed up." Below on Neth's surface, 80 human war machines continued their systematic destruction of the Vorax occupation force. They moved with coordinated precision, each pilot part of a larger tactical network that turned individual warriors into components of an unstoppable war engine. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had never lost a ground war. The Vorax response came at dawn on the second day. Bioships began raining from orbit like living meteorites, each one carrying thousands of ground forms, bred specifically for planetary assault. The creatures that emerged from the organic drop, pods were larger and more heavily armored than the initial occupation force, their chitin plates gleaming with acidic secretions that had dissolved energy weapons in previous battles. But the humans were not where the Vorax expected them to be. Pilot Martinez crouched his Warwalker Steel Rain behind the ruins of a factory complex in what had once been New Rilani's industrial district. Around him, 19 other war machines maintained perfect silence, their thermal signatures masked by heat-dispersing camouflage netting. The humans had spent the night not celebrating their initial victory, but preparing for the inevitable. "Counterattack! Movement on Sensor Grid 7, whispered Pilot Foster through the tactical network. Her machine, Ghostwalker, occupied a concealed position 3 kilometers away. Estimate 2,000 bioforms, heading directly for our previous. Firing positions, Martinez smiled grimly inside his cockpit. The Vorax were doing exactly what human tacticians had predicted, rushing to engage where the enemy had last been seen. It was textbook hive mind thinking, efficient, but predictable. The creatures had no concept of deception or misdirection, concepts that humans had perfected over millennia of warfare. "Execute ambush pattern Delta," came Admiral Torres's voice from the command ship. "All units, weapons free on my mark." The Vorax ground forms advanced through the urban ruins with typical efficiency, their biosensors scanning for the heat signatures and energy emissions that marked enemy positions. They found nothing but empty craters and cold metal. The human Warwalkers had vanished like ghosts, leaving only the destruction from yesterday's battle. Then the killing began. Steel rain erupted from its concealed position like a metal volcano, Martinez bringing his machine to full height in a single fluid motion. The rotary cannon spun up instantly, 20-millimeter rounds pouring into the packed ranks of Vorax creatures at point-blank range. The bioforms, caught in the open with no cover, died by the hundreds in the first seconds of the ambush. But Martinez was not alone. Ghostwalker opened fire from her elevated position, adding missile salvos to the withering crossfire. Thunder emerged from a different direction entirely, its pilot Kim coordinating with a squad of mobile artillery platforms that had been pre-positioned during the night. The Vorax found themselves caught in a kill zone with no escape routes. Textbook. L-shaped ambush, observed Colonel Hayes from his command Warwalker overlooking the battlefield. These creatures never learn. The battle that followed demonstrated the fundamental difference between human and galactic approaches to warfare. Other species fought with honor, following established protocols and engaging enemies in what they considered civilized combat. Humans fought to win, using every advantage they could create or exploit. When Vorax bioforms tried to take cover behind building remnants, human combat engineers detonated pre-placed charges that brought entire structures down on top of them. When the creatures attempted to burrow underground to escape the surface fire, they found the tunnel systems already mapped and mined with explosives. When flying bioforms tried to provide air support, they ran into carefully coordinated anti-aircraft. Fire from multiple directions. "They're not fighting fair," complained Defense Coordinator Lesh from the Rilani observation ship. "Those tactics, they're using the environment as a weapon." Chancellor Tem watched the tactical display with growing amazement. The humans had turned the entire ruins of New Rilani into a weapon system, every piece of debris positioned to channel enemy movement into predetermined kill zones. It was warfare as art form, beautiful and terrible in its efficiency. On the ground, Pilot Rodriguez advanced his machine through a sector that intelligence had identified as a Vorax breeding facility. The organic structures pulsed with nauseating life, their walls weeping acidic fluid that would have destroyed conventional energy weapons. But Iron Fist carried something the Vorax had never encountered before. The flamethrower system ignited with a sound like tearing silk, projecting a stream of burning liquid that clung to organic surfaces and could not be extinguished. The fuel mixture, a human invention called napalm, burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. Vorax bioforms caught in the stream did not just die, they were cremated where they stood. "Breeding facility neutralized," Rodriguez reported with grim satisfaction, moving to secondary targets. But the true demonstration of human tactical thinking came when the Vorax commanders, desperate to stop the systematic destruction of their forces, committed their air superiority assets. Massive bioships, each one the size of a destroyer, descended from orbit to provide direct fire support to their ground forces. The ships were magnificent in their own terrible way, living creatures that had grown in the void between stars. Their organic armor could absorb energy weapon strikes that would vaporize conventional spacecraft. Their bioplasma projectors could reduce mountains to slag. They represented the pinnacle of Vorax military evolution. Against them, the humans deployed weapons that would have been considered obsolete by galactic standards for over 1,000 years. "Target acquisition confirmed," announced Pilot Williams from her heavy assault Warwalker Iron Mountain. The machine carried shoulder-mounted missile pods, loaded with what humans called surface-to-air missiles, chemical rockets guided by primitive computer systems. Engaging hostile aircraft. The missiles streaked skyward on pillars of fire, their primitive guidance systems locking onto the massive heat signatures of the descending bioships. The Vorax vessels, accustomed to sophisticated energy weapons that could be deflected or absorbed, had no defense against simple explosive warheads traveling at hypersonic speeds. The first missile struck a bioship amidships, the conventional, explosive warhead detonating inside the creature's body cavity. The ship convulsed, its bioluminescent patterns flickering as internal organs ruptured. A second missile hit near the creature's neural cluster, and the massive bioform began falling toward the planet's surface in an uncontrolled spiral. "Splash one ugly," Williams reported with pilot's understated humor. "Engaging target 2. The engagement that followed redefined galactic understanding of aerospace combat. The Vorax bioships evolved to survive in the vacuum of space and resist energy weapons, proved helplessly vulnerable to the kinetic violence of human missile technology. Their organic armor, flexible enough to deflect plasma beams, could not disperse the focused impact of high explosives. Within an hour, 7 bioships had been destroyed, and 3 more severely damaged. The survivors retreated to high orbit, their bioplasma projectors useless against targets they could not approach. But the humans were not finished. Colonel Hayes had been studying the tactical situation, identifying patterns in Vorax behavior that other species had missed. The creatures were not just mindless monsters, they were components of a larger organism, and like any organism, they had critical weaknesses. "All units, target priority update," he announced over the tactical network. "Focus fire on bioforms displaying neural enhancement nodules. Designation, node creatures." The identification had come from human xenobiologists, working with captured Vorax specimens. Hidden among the swarm's rank-and-file creatures were specialized organisms that served as relay points for the hive mind's command structure. Other species had never noticed them because they looked nearly identical to standard bioforms. But human pattern recognition, evolved for hunting on prehistoric Earth, had spotted the subtle differences. As the Warwalkers began systematically eliminating node creatures, something unprecedented happened. The Vorax coordination began breaking down. Swarm forms that had moved with perfect unity began colliding with each other. Attack patterns devolved into confused milling. The hive mind was losing its ability to think. "By the ancestors," whispered Chancellor Tem, watching the tactical display. "They're severing the creature's nervous system." Admiral Torres allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as reports flooded in from the battlefield. The Vorax, terror of the galaxy for 3 centuries, were being systematically dismantled by human tactical doctrine and weapons technology that most civilizations considered primitive. "Inform the fleet," he ordered. "Begin preparations for Phase 2. We're taking this fight to their source." The primary hive construct on Rilani Prime stretched across 50 square kilometers of what had once been the capital city's cultural district. Its organic towers reached toward the clouded sky like the fingers of a buried giant, each one pulsing, with bioluminescent veins that carried information through the Vorax distributed nervous system. 10 million bioforms moved within the structure's shadow, preparing for humanity's inevitable assault. The Vorax had learned from their defeats on the outer worlds. No longer would they scatter their forces or rely on predictable tactics. Every creature in their remaining fleet had been recalled to defend the hive construct, creating a concentration of firepower that could overwhelm any conventional assault. They would make the humans pay dearly for every meter of ground. But the humans were not planning a conventional assault. 2 kilometers above the hive construct, Admiral Torres stood in the observation deck of the command ship Retribution, watching. The final pieces of his battle plan fall into place. The remaining human carriers had taken position in high orbit, their launch bays open and ready. 80 Warwalkers stood in their deployment cradles, but these were not the same machines that had fought on the outer worlds. "Final weapons check complete," reported Chief Engineer Parks. "All walkers equipped with specialized ordnance packages. Thermite charges armed, kinetic penetrators loaded, and fragmentation systems ready for deployment." The modifications had taken 3 days of round-the-clock work. Human engineering teams, working with data gathered from previous battles, had customized each Warwalker for the specific challenges of hive construct assault. Where other species saw an impenetrable fortress, humans saw a target-rich environment, with exploitable structural weaknesses. Colonel Hayes reviewed the tactical plan one final time. The assault would begin with precision orbital strikes, not from energy weapons but from simple kinetic projectiles accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The tungsten rods would punch through the hive construct's organic armor like needles through flesh, creating breach points for the Warwalker assault teams. "Remember," he addressed the assembled pilots over the tactical network, "we're not just destroying this facility. We're performing surgery on a living organism. Every shot counts, every target serves the larger mission." Pilot Miller, strapped into the neural interface of her machine Iron Prophet, felt the familiar sensation of human consciousness merging with mechanical precision. Around her, 79 other pilots underwent the same transformation, becoming something more than human, but retaining the essential qualities that made them effective warriors. The orbital bombardment began at exactly 0800 local time. Tungsten rods, each one the size of a telephone pole, struck the hive construct at velocities that turned kinetic energy into temporary stars. The organic armor that had shrugged off energy weapon strikes for centuries proved useless against simple mass traveling at relativistic speeds. Massive wounds opened in the hive construct's surface, exposing the complex internal structures that kept the facility functioning. Bioluminescent fluid sprayed from severed arteries the size of subway tunnels. Warning pheromones filled the air as the creature structure went into biological shock. "Drop initiated," announced Admiral Torres. "All walkers, you are cleared for combat deployment." The Warwalkers fell like metal angels, their armor plating glowing white-hot from atmospheric entry. But instead of spreading out across a battlefield, they aimed for specific breach points in the hive construct's wounded surface. The humans were not just attacking the facility, they were invading it. Iron Prophet struck the organic surface with an impact that shattered chitin plates across a 100-meter radius. Miller oriented herself quickly, her machine's sensors adapting to the strange environment inside the living fortress. Corridors stretched away in all directions, their walls pulsing with alien life. The air itself seemed thick with hostile intelligence. "Contact front," she reported as Vorax bioforms poured from side passages like antibodies responding to infection. "Engaging defensive organisms." The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic military history. The Warwalkers fought their way through passages designed for creatures a tenth their size, using brute force to widen corridors and demolition charges to blast through organic barriers. Their weapons, so effective in open combat, proved even more devastating in the confined spaces of the hive construct. Pilot Anderson, commanding the assault Warwalker Steel Fury, encountered his first major obstacle when a massive sphincter muscle contracted to block his advance. The biological barrier, designed to isolate damaged sections of the facility, could withstand pressures that would crush starship hulls. "Thermite charge placed and armed," Anderson reported with grim satisfaction. The shaped charge burned through organic tissue at 3,000 degrees, creating a passage large enough for his machine to continue forward. Behind him, the severed muscle contracted reflexively, spraying acidic fluid that would have dissolved energy weapons but merely scarred his ceramic armor plating. The deeper the humans penetrated into the hive construct, the more they understood its true nature. This was not just a military facility, but the brain of the entire Vorax presence in Rilani space. Organic data conduits carried information between different sections, coordinating the activities of millions of bioforms across multiple star systems. "Neural nexus identified," reported Pilot Kim from her position near what appeared to be the facility's central core. The chamber around her stretched away into biological darkness, filled with pulsing organic structures that hurt to look at directly. Requesting permission to engage primary target. Colonel Hayes studied the tactical data flooding back from Kim's sensors. The structure she had found was clearly the hive construct's primary command center, the organic equivalent of a military headquarters. Destroying it would sever the Vorax ability to coordinate their remaining forces. "Permission granted," he replied. "Make it count." Thunder raised its primary weapon, but instead of the expected cannon fire, Kim deployed something the Vorax had never encountered. The fragmentation charges scattered through the chamber like metal seeds, each one programmed to detonate at precisely calculated intervals. The explosions came in sequence, designed to maximize structural damage while preventing the facility from sealing the wounds. The effect was catastrophic. The neural nexus convulsed as its information processing capacity was systematically destroyed. Bioluminescent patterns flickered and died as connections severed. The hive construct's equivalent of a scream echoed through passages kilometer away, a subsonic wail that made human teeth ache. But the true breakthrough came when pilot Rodriguez, fighting his way through a section that seemed to be some kind of biological factory, made an unprecedented discovery. Among the standard bioforms rushing to defend the facility, he encountered something different. A Vorax creature that was not attacking, but trying to communicate. Command. "You're not going to believe this," he reported, his voice tight with amazement. "I've got a Vorax trying to surrender." The implications hit the human command structure like a physical blow. For 3 centuries, the Vorax had been considered a mindless hive organism, incapable of individual thought or negotiation. But as the hive construct's neural networks collapsed under human assault, individual creatures were beginning to exhibit independent behavior. "All units, new rules of engagement," ordered Colonel Hayes. "Bioforms displaying non-aggressive behavior are to be considered potential prisoners of war. Do not fire unless fired upon." The battle continued, but its nature changed fundamentally. As more neural nexuses were destroyed, more Vorax creatures began acting as individuals rather than components of a larger organism. Some continued fighting with desperate fury, but others simply stopped, as if awakening from a long dream. Miller, still advancing through the facility's central passages, encountered an entire chamber full of Vorax creatures that had simply laid down their bioweapons and were making what could only be interpreted as gestures of submission. It was a sight that no galactic military force had ever witnessed. "The hive mind is fragmenting," she reported with wonder in her voice. "They're becoming individuals." The final assault on the hive construct's core took 6 hours of continuous combat. When the last neural relay was severed, and the facility's bioluminescent patterns finally went dark, something extraordinary happened throughout Rilani space. Vorax bioships, previously moving with perfect coordination, began drifting aimlessly. Ground forces stopped their advance and began displaying the same confused behavior the humans had observed in the facility. The Vorax swarm, terror of civilized space for 300 years, had not been destroyed. It had been transformed, its components liberated from the hive mind that had driven their endless aggression. Individual creatures, capable of choice for perhaps the first time in their species' history, were choosing not to fight. Admiral Torres watched the tactical displays update with surrender signals from across the system. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Begin humanitarian operations. We've got a lot of newly independent life forms who are going to need help figuring out what to do next." The galaxy would never be the same. The Galactic Council chamber had never hosted such an unusual gathering. Representatives from 47 different species filled the floating platforms that surrounded the central speaking area, but today the focus was not on the traditional powers that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. Instead, all eyes were on the small delegation from Sol system, the humans who had accomplished what the galaxy's greatest militaries had failed to achieve. Admiral Torres stood at the central podium, his simple military uniform contrasting sharply with the elaborate ceremonial garb worn by other delegates. Behind him, a holographic display showed the current status of former Vorax space. Where once there had been destructive swarm fleets, now there were refugee camps and rehabilitation centers as individual Vorax learned to exist as separate beings rather than components of a collective mind. "The immediate crisis is over," Torres reported to the assembled delegates. "Vorax aggression has ceased across all affected systems. However, this creates new challenges that will require galactic cooperation to address." Chancellor Tem of the Rilani Federation occupied the platform closest to the human delegation, his blue skin still bearing the stress marks from the recent crisis. Around him, his advisors monitored translation systems that were working overtime to interpret concepts that had no equivalent in most galactic languages. Terms like combined arms doctrine, strategic depth, and asymmetric warfare were being added to diplomatic databases across the galaxy. The human approach to warfare, Tam addressed the assembly, has proven devastatingly effective against threats we considered invincible. I formally propose that humanity be granted full membership status in the Galactic Council, with all associated rights and responsibilities. The motion sparked immediate debate. The Zephyrian Empire's representative, Ambassador Vale, rose on his platform with obvious reluctance. His species had dominated galactic military doctrine for over 2,000 years, and the human victory had implications that extended far beyond the Vorax crisis. "While we acknowledge humanity's recent success," Vale said carefully, "we must consider the broader implications of their methods. Their weapons are designed purely for destruction, with no consideration for the elegant principles that have guided civilized warfare for millennia." Torres smiled grimly at the criticism. "Ambassador Vale, with respect, elegant principles don't save lives when facing extinction. The Vorax killed 40 billion beings across 17 different systems before we intervened. Our methods may seem crude, but they work." From another platform, the Synthetic Collective's representative, a crystalline entity designated as Prime Logic, projected its thoughts through quantum harmonics. "The human tactical approach demonstrates superior adaptability indices. Their willingness to employ primitive kinetic weapons against evolved bioarmor represents innovative thinking that our predictive models failed to anticipate." The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was inevitable. Species after species rose to share their own encounters with threats that conventional galactic military doctrine had failed to address. Pirates using adaptive shielding. Rogue artificial intelligences that learn to counter energy weapons in real time. Ancient automated defense systems that had resisted conquest for centuries. "We request human military advisors," announced the representative from the Outer Rim colonies. "Our mining operations have been under constant attack from crystalline entities that absorb energy weapons and use them to grow stronger. Our patrol fleets need retraining," added the delegate from the Trade Federation. "Pirates have begun using bioships similar to Vorax designs. Our energy weapons are useless against them." Torres listened to the requests with growing amazement. The humans had arrived in galactic society as primitives barely worthy of notice. Now they were being asked to revolutionize military thinking across dozens of star systems. "The human defense fleet is prepared to share our tactical knowledge," he announced, "but we'll need facilities to train mixed species units. Our methods require significant adaptation for non-human physiology and psychology." The solution came from an unexpected source. The Rilani Federation offered to host the first galactic military academy on their world of Sanctuary, a planet that had been evacuated during the Vorax crisis but was now being resettled. The symbolism was perfect, a world saved by human tactics, becoming the birthplace of a new approach to galactic security. 6 months later, Lieutenant Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed academy, watching the first class of alien Warwalker pilots practice basic maneuvers. The modified machines looked strange with their non-human cockpits and specialized life support systems, but they moved with growing confidence across the training grounds. His own machine, Iron Fist, had been retired to the Academy's museum after the Vorax campaign. The battle damage on its armor plating told the story of humanity's introduction to galactic warfare. each scar representing a moment when primitive human technology had proven superior to advanced alien science. "Pilot Tem reporting for advanced tactics training," came a familiar voice over the communication system. Rodriguez turned to see Chancellor Tem approaching in a modified Warwalker designed for Rilani physiology. The former politician had enrolled in the pilot training program personally, determined to understand the methods that had saved his people. His machine, designated Peace Walker, carried weapons that would have been considered barbarically primitive just a year ago. "Chancellor," Rodriguez acknowledged with a slight smile. "Ready for urban combat simulation?" The training scenario that followed would have been impossible to imagine before the Vorax crisis. A Rilani politician learned to fight building-to-building battles using human tactical doctrine, while former enemies worked together to master the art of kinetic warfare. The exercise took place under the supervision of human instructors who had once been considered galactic primitives, but the real changes were happening far beyond the academy. Across the galaxy, species that had relied on energy weapons for millennia were retooling their factories to produce kinetic systems. The elegant principles of civilized warfare were giving way to the brutal effectiveness of human military science. On the trade routes, pirate attacks had dropped by 70% as criminal organizations discovered that their adaptive defenses were useless against simple explosives and metal projectiles. Ancient defense systems that had protected forgotten. Ruins for thousands of years fell to human assault tactics within days of contact. Even the Vorax themselves were adapting to their new existence. Individual creatures, freed from the hive mind's compulsions, were developing unique personalities and interests. Some chose to remain in isolation, processing their transformation from collective to individual consciousness. Others sought integration with galactic society, offering their biological expertise in exchange for acceptance and understanding. Dr. Foster, the human xenobiologist who had first identified the Vorax neural vulnerabilities, now ran a research station where former swarm creatures worked alongside scientists from dozens of species. The irony was not lost on anyone that beings who had once consumed entire worlds were now contributing to galactic knowledge. "They remember everything," she explained to visiting researchers. "Every world the swarm consumed, every technology they encountered, every species they absorbed. But now they experience guilt, regret, individual desires. It's the most significant transformation in galactic history." The political implications continued to ripple through established power structures. The Zephyrian Empire, no longer the galaxy's dominant military force, had begun incorporating human tactical advisors into their command structure. The Crystal Consortium's elegant combat algorithms were being rewritten to account for the chaos and unpredictability of human warfare. Admiral Torres, now bearing the title of Galactic Military Coordinator, established his headquarters on Sanctuary alongside the Academy. His office walls displayed artifacts from humanity's first galactic war, alongside gifts from species grateful for their liberation from various threats. A Rilani crystal sculpture sat next to a Zephyrian honor blade, symbols of a galaxy learning to value effectiveness over elegance. "Report from the Outer Rim," announced his aide, Captain Miller, entering with the latest updates. "The crystalline entities have been neutralized using thermobaric weapons. Total human casualties, 0. Torres nodded, unsurprised by the result. Across the galaxy, threats that had seemed insurmountable were falling to human tactics and weapons. Technology. The secret was not advanced science, but simple physics applied with ruthless efficiency. The final transformation came during the Academy's first graduation ceremony. Representatives from 47 species watched as the first class of mixed-species Warwalker pilots received their certifications. Humans stood alongside Rilani, Zephyrians, synthetics, and even several reformed Vorax individuals, all united by their mastery of human military doctrine. Chancellor Tem, now bearing the rank of colonel in the Galactic Defense Force, delivered the graduation address. His words carried the weight of personal experience, with both defeat and victory. We learned that advanced technology means nothing without the will to use it effectively, he told the assembled graduates. We learned that sometimes civilization's highest achievement is knowing when to abandon civilized restraint. Most importantly, we learned that the galaxy's newest members, these humans from a small world on the rim, possess something we had forgotten in our pursuit of elegant solutions. He paused, looking directly at the human instructors who had transformed. Galactic military thinking. They possess the courage to do what is necessary, regardless of what others might think. That courage, combined with their willingness to share their knowledge freely, has given us all a second chance at survival. The ceremony concluded with the traditional flyover, but instead of elegant energy weapon fighters, the sky filled with Warwalkers from a dozen different species. The mechanical giants moved in perfect formation, their weapons systems powered down but ready, symbols of a galaxy that had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes peace could only be preserved through the credible threat of overwhelming violence. And sometimes, the most important military innovation was remembering that wars were won not by the most advanced weapons, but by warriors willing to use any weapon that worked. The galaxy had a new order now, one built on human principles, but shared by all species willing to defend what they valued. The Warwalkers stood ready, their pilots trained in the ancient human arts of tactical flexibility and adaptive violence. They were the guardians of a civilization that had learned to balance elegance with effectiveness, beauty with brutality, and hope with the hard knowledge that sometimes terrible things must be done to preserve everything worth preserving.